Okay, we're back live streaming and we're also back recording and we're coming out from our in-camera session. So council was provided information that will be further completed it was given verbally. So a report will be coming forward next week, which will be coming forward for decision at that time. Next on the agenda is staff reports, administration report, SR-075-22 lease agreement with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Sealy's Bay Small Craft Harbor. So the motion comes forward from Councillor Gorell, seconded by Councillor Olkey, that the committee of the whole recommends the council authorize the mayor and clerk to execute on behalf of the township a lease in the respect of the Small Craft Harbor facility in Sealy's Bay with Her Majesty the Queen in right of Canada, represented by the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Any discussion on the motion? I think it's fairly straightforward. Go ahead, Councillor Grimm.
Just to note that to the best of my knowledge, reading the 2018 agreement, there are no real changes in it.
No,
So
agreed.
for the public, it's just a 5-year renewal.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. CAO, would you like to speak to that?
Just to confirm, that's my reading as well. I went through line by line and it's the same agreement.
Perfect. Okay, any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried. Next item on the agenda is 5.2 Administration Report SR-080-22 Amendments to the Refreshment Vehicles Bylaw. Motion comes forward from Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the committee of the whole recommends that council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-035, being a bylaw to update the licensing and regulation of refreshment vehicles and rescind bylaw number 07-014, being a bylaw that originally established the licensing and regulation of refreshment vehicles. Discussion, comments on this motion? I'll take council's questions first, and then I'll have you come to the podium. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to our planner. I think this is very fair, the changes that were made. Now, where do we stand on, because you were supposed to be on commercial property. What about, if they have a ball tournament over here, putting the trucks on township property?
Those provisions of the bylaw haven't been amended, so a refreshment vehicle on township property would need authorization through council to be located there. That would be considered a special event in line with the policies that have been brought forward. Any other refreshment vehicle located in the township based on an annual license, which remains at $500, would be required to be located on a commercial property that's compliant with zoning.
Okay, Councillor Fody, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. There seems to be some confusion, at least among our events organizers, as to how this implicates their food vendors. Can you simplify this for us and those? Thank you.
Sure. So the zone or the refreshment vehicle bylaw defines a refreshment vehicle. It's a vehicle. It's like a chip truck, a food truck of some sort. It's not a tent that you're serving food under. It's not an ice cream wagon. It's a refreshment. It's a moving vehicle that has all of the propane and everything contained within the vehicle itself. So if you're talking about a food tent at an event, if you're talking about a booth at an event where somebody may have a barbecue set up behind that, that is not a refreshment vehicle.
Okay. Follow up, Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship. Some of the comments made, and I'm sure you've heard them more than myself, are the requirements that are needed to meet approval by those particular vehicles. What would they be in a nutshell?
So a refreshment vehicle is required to have a health unit inspection and approval. It's required to have, I believe it's TSSA with respect to the propane within it. It's required to have a fire inspection to ensure that any necessary fire suppression equipment is included in the vehicle. And then it's required to have a review in terms of its location for zoning to make sure that everything's in order with the location.
Does that pertain to a special event as far as location? Because the way that you've explained it is more of a stationary vehicle, I would think.
So at a special event, depending on the location of it, so if it's located on our road allowance, that's something that council would need to consider. I'm not certain that that was contemplated in the amendments to allow them within our road allowance without council permission. No. So a refreshment vehicle is required to be located on a property where it's permitted by zoning. The bylaw does allow for council to
Allow
have
it.
special circumstances where they could waive some of the requirements. If it's to be located in the road allowance, we would need to know where it's going to be located. We'd want to review that with the fire department in terms of making sure that it's not creating an obstacle for emergency vehicles or anybody else, to make sure that any fuel sources are going to be kept in a safe location away from the public and those types of things. And then it would need to be brought forward to council for consideration.
Okay. Last follow-up with Counselor Foti and then Counselor Olkey.
I've been notified. Last call. Okay, then I'll sum it up. We have Sillies Bay July 1st celebrations. We have Lansdowne Fair coming up, and we have Linter's Turkey Fair, to name three large ones. When did we pass this motion? Was it not just a few months ago, this special events policy?
It was in
In March,
I
February?
think. April. Sorry.
Okay, that even bodes better to what my point will be. None of the organizations has have time to comprehend all this. They're confused. Some of them have the sky falling. That's not what we want to do after 2 years of a pandemic, is to send all of our volunteers for a large part into chaos over what is scripted as being well. I have no problem with the events policy. I think the real problem out there is the time they have to get ready. And just to name off the inspections required, as our director of planning has done, some of these organizations won't have that time. Lansdowne Fair will be held in approximately 5 to 6 weeks from now. These people don't have time. My suggestion would be hold the policy, but waive any requirements till the end of this calendar year, but come into full implementation next year. I don't think they have time to be compliant. I really don't. Thank you.
I'll recognize the CAO and then Counselor Jameson. Oh, sorry. And then, Counselor Olkey first. My apologies. Counselor Olkey and then the CAO, then Counselor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship. One nitnoid point. I noticed that para 3, subpara A, grammar, you have place where it should say placed. I'll leave that one alone. My concern would be, what I don't understand is if someone with one of these food vending wagons gets approval by the health unit, is that approval good for a year to all vendors or to all venues, or must they get a new approval per venue?
Go ahead.
Through the health unit approvals, as well as the fire approvals and the TSA approvals, should be good anywhere they go, because these are vehicles that are designed to be mobile. They're mobile kitchens. And so any food truck in the township is required to have them. This is not a new requirement. This bylaw has been in effect for a number of years. That being said, as I said, it doesn't apply to a food booth or something. So if any of these event organizers are going out finding food trucks to attend their events, most municipalities require the exact same licensing that we do, and any food truck vendor should have the same approvals and be ready to hand them to us. It's not a matter of they need to go out and get site-specific and event-specific inspections. If you run a food truck, you should have these inspections done
Already done.
annually, and it should be a matter of reproducing documentation.
Counselor Olkey wants to clarify his question.
If I understand you, Madam Planner, if it's an annual inspection and a permit from there is granted, that permit is good throughout that year at all venues. Is that correct?
We would just need to see it
You need to see it,
for
but,
our licensing.
but you
yes.
don't need them to go through the inspection process again.
No, that's correct. They do not need to go through the inspection process again.
Good, thank you.
Okay, CAO and then Counselor Jameson.
So a couple of points. Yes, the special events policy was passed by council on April 12th. Since that time, we've had 2 online sessions. The acting director of Community and Business Services has had webinars on what the meaning of the policy is. She's done outreach to the various groups to help explain it all. As Director of Planning was saying, these inspections are inspections that would need to be done from a refreshment vehicle standpoint anyway. So I don't think it's an unduly onerous thing. We've had lots of support for event organizers if they wish to do this. If council decides to suspend the policy for this year to give another year, that's council's purview, of course. Then the refreshment vehicle policy falls into place, and any refreshment vehicle attending a special event is going to have an annual license at $510. So
So
just so
perhaps
you're
we're
aware.
talking about two different things, is what you're saying. Is if you're talking, Counselor Foti, in bringing a notice of motion forward to put a moratorium on it, then that's separate from this particular motion, which is specific to the refreshment vehicle licensing costs.
Well, correct. I'm just trying to take the burden off the hype. And I think a lot of it is just that, the hype that's been created from this. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's those that don't want to understand it. There's those that don't even want to comply with it. But at the same point, they're under a serious time constraint, any one of them. I mean, here we sit June the 6th for a July 1st celebration in Sillies Bay. I mean, we're days away and weeks away and only a couple of months away from Lyndhurst. So I don't know. I would like my fellow counselors' input on this. I don't want to see us burden these events when they're just coming out of a heavy blanket of 2 years of being shut down. And I don't want us to be that third year. Thank you.
I'm going to recognize Counselor Jameson.
Part of the confusion, I think, rests with us too. As the planners pointed out, there are certain things that, and we're only dealing with this vendor. This is what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with fireworks. We're not dealing with all these things that go on at the harbors and all this stuff. But to separate, this is the vendors thing, and the changes to the existing or the legislation or whatever you want to call it, the bylaws as it exists now, from my point of view, need to be done. This bylaw needs to be done for a couple of reasons. One, the 510 for somebody that will come in for one day is
Onerous.
just a little bit overwhelming. Two, the regulations, the safety, health and safety being number one issue for us, that needs to be satisfied. No matter what we do, that needs to be satisfied with respect to it. So on an upper tier, there's certain things going on, as the planner mentioned, on the upper tier, including the health inspection. Then on our tier are another set of inspections that ensure the health and safety of everybody associated with it. And we need to do that because of our liability. What appears to be coming down to, and this is where I think Councillor Foti's point is very well taken in that we feel from the community, and we certainly spent a day yesterday, it was only yesterday, up in Lyndhurst, having a long discussion with all these good people, and including many of our friends at the Chamber of Commerce. It is partly the shock of the new. We're making changes because we're concerned about the liability of the township, which ultimately affects our tax bill. So we want to do it. So my view is really reflected in a letter we got from John Sedaris at the Chamber of Commerce, that we need to pass this. But my suggestion is we make an amendment that would waive that $100 fee for the balance of this year, this calendar year, and would come into force January 1. The reason I'm suggesting that is that I'm anticipating everyone will settle down and we'll move into, we're coming out of stuff, everybody's stressed. That's my suggestion on this emotional intelligence. Let's kind of embrace that a little bit. The reality is that even if the township, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, but if the township, even if it collects that $100, that's not even close to what it's costing the township to go out and inspect. So we forego a revenue of $300 or $400, and I'm now referring to the turkey fair, but we're still eating, I shouldn't say eating, we're still required to spend that money anyway, much more than that $100. So I think for the purposes of calming everybody down and getting this law passed, because the old law also had something in it that really bothers me. You know, council could, the $500, we could waive it. We could all have a meeting and waive a fee. And that's not good management. We have an annual thing where we look at the fees, and this makes sense because now it falls into the annual program. Whereas before, you know, somebody starts nudging me down there in Sealy's Bay saying, you got to waive this thing. Next thing I know, I'm lobbying council to try to waive a fee. That's where things go sideways in these environments, I think. So I would like to see us pass this because I think it's a good, solid move in the right direction. But I would also like to see us introduce an amendment to waive the fees for the balance of this year only.
So your amendment, Mr. Jameson, would be that the $100 fee be waived for the balance of 2022 and come into effect in 2023.
Yes, your worship. Thank you.
And do I have a seconder for that amendment, Councillor Olkey? Okay. So just let me. Okay. So the amendment would be that we waive the $100 fee for the balance of 2022 to be enforced as of January 1st, 2023. Okay, so I'm looking for speakers to or against the amendment. Speakers for the amendment, speakers against the amendment. Go ahead, Councillor Gorell, and then Councillor Olkey.
Just for clarification, then, thank you through you, Your Worship. So we do have a $510 fee at this time for special or for food vendors. And what the amendment is simply stating that we are liking the idea of a reduced fee for special events, but we're waiving that for a period of time.
For a period of
Do I understand that
2022.
correctly? Thank you. I would be in favor of that. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions on the amendment? Okay, so the amendment would read that we waive the fee of $100 for the balance of 2022 to be enforced for January 1st, 2023. Okay. So I'll call the question on the amendment. Can I have those in favor of the amendment? Those against the amendment? So it's carried. So I'll read the full motion and then I'll take the comments from the gallery. That the committee of the whole recommends that council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-035 being a bylaw to update the licensing and regulation of refreshment vehicles and rescind bylaw number 07-014 being a bylaw that originally established the licensing and regulation of refreshment vehicles, and that the fee be waived, the fee of $100 be waived for the balance of 2022 and then to be enforced as of January 1st, 2023. Any further comments on that? I'll ask the gentleman from the gallery to speak at this point.
I'm Peter Sibbald, and my primary concern is the treatment of the turkey fair, but as Councillor Foti points out, many other events are affected by this bylaw, this proposed bylaw. What is written is not what happens. Although it says in the bylaw that the food vendors pay $510, there are 8 food vendors that I'm concerned about at the turkey fair who, as far as I know, have never paid a dime. They simply don't. Nobody's collected it. And in fact, this bylaw, although we're led to believe that the vendor organizers don't like it, most of them are unaware of it. We've never had, none of the organizers, and I know many of the organizers of events in this township. And believe me, this bylaw was not a subject that we discussed. We don't care. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying it's not something we're focused on. So what happens then if you raise the fee to $100? It de facto goes from $0, which is what was paid, to $100, because nothing was paid previously. So that seems like a bit of a rise. The vendors usually give the turkey fair a tip. They do well at our fair, and they give us a tip of on the order of $100. Sometimes it's $200 because they're generous. But if you take that money from them, then the township will get it and we won't. And this raises our costs. We don't like that. We're reasonable people, but there are things we don't like. This is one of them. Anytime I see an arbitrary value, my alarm bells go off. If somebody says to me that something should be $100 to recover costs, I want to see the costs. Now, how do I know if it's $100? Furthermore, if $100 happens to be correct, it just might be, this year, well, after inflation, it's not going to be right in 3 years. So this is an arbitrary measure, and I think most politicians and the public should be opposed to any kind of arbitrary measure. But that's just my opinion. A more serious problem, I was just reading this lovely sign over here, and there's a bit in green. Read it when you get a chance. It explains how the township is open for business, and we're encouraging people to come here and do business. Well, you don't encourage them by fining them $100 for doing so. The $100 is peanuts to the township. The township's got a budget of $19 million or something. To charge a food vendor who's trying to make a living $100 is just petty. The administration probably eats the $100. So we're told in the preamble to this document that this bylaw, this new bylaw, addresses a concern raised by event organizers. I have trouble believing this. There certainly was some complaint by folks over at Sealy's Bay when a fishing derby was held without it being approved. But I don't think event organizers were complaining about the bylaw itself, and that's the only instance that comes to mind. Now, I don't know everything. Perhaps event organizers have been saying, we want more bylaws, we want a new bylaw, but none that I have spoken with. So this is, the point there is, this is not a grassroots driven bylaw, right? You don't have people in the township saying, I want a new bylaw, please give me a new bylaw. I think this is coming from higher up, but I don't know why, but certainly not something we want. As was pointed out by Mr. Okel, condition 3A is a typo. And I only point that out because if you're going to threaten somebody with a $5,000 fine, you better have your language right. It's detailed. Clause 5 has been of interest, and Councillor Jameson has mentioned clause 5, and clause 5 gives council the ability to have discretion. They can make decisions. They can decide to waive fees. And it's interesting, there was just a vote to waive fees. So you know, there are precedents. This has been done. I think it's useful for council to be able to have discretionary power. I think that's part of what council does. I was on the Committee of Adjustment for 4 years, and the Committee of Adjustment, as you may well know, exists entirely to have discretion. It exists to make exceptions to bylaws because bylaws aren't perfect. And although you might think that you're foreseeing everything, when you make a bylaw, guess what? Whoops. You know, we all have whoops. So you're gonna, you know, you may decide that you don't need to charge this. Imagine that somebody's having an event for charity. You might decide, well, we're not going to charge a charity event. Well, there's no mention of a charity event in the bylaw, right? But if council had discretionary power, they could say, you know what, we're going to waive that because we think it's a decent thing to do. So I asked council how they feel about giving up power. So this doesn't look just like a cash grab, which it sort of feels like, but it's also a power grab. You're losing power. You're losing decision-making power, which it's up to you how you feel about it. But I would give up power reluctantly, being a little dictator, but no. So on the other point that's been made is we need this money to recover costs for health inspections and fire inspections and all these other good things. And it's kind of been explained here that these people already have health inspections. And at the Turkey Fair, when a vendor is going to come, we ask them, in fact, we demand that they show us their health inspection certificate and their fire inspection certificate. But more empirically, I mean, who cares about theory? More empirically, in 25 years, we haven't had any food poisoning. We haven't had things burning down. We don't have any problems. Now, that doesn't mean we never will, but we've got a good safety record. So we don't really need more rules imposed upon us to help us do what we're already doing, right? And furthermore, because the health inspection is done externally, and these vendors move from fair to fair, they have already paid for this, right? And you're not incurring any costs. There are no costs. And I've never seen a food truck inspected at the fair. And there are 8 of them, and I've been to every fair. I started volunteering at the first fair. So that's basically all I have to say.
Are there any questions for the speaker? I don't see any, so go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to thank the speaker for his courage in coming here and laying a few things out where they need to be laid out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read the full bylaw as amended for a vote. So it's moved by Councillor Oakey, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-035, being a bylaw to update the licensing and regulation of refreshment vehicles, and rescind bylaw number 7-014, being a bylaw that originally established the licensing and regulation for refreshment vehicles, and it's to be waived, the $100 fee to be waived for the balance of 2022 and to be put in force for January 1st, 2023. Any further discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Grow.
Does that fee then enter into, and thank you through your worship, does that fee enter into our fees and bylaw? Is that how that would be regulated per se? And that's open to each year. We review that every year. Am I right saying that? Or would we have to change this bylaw?
That's what the motion is, changing the bylaw as it sits now.
Where I'm going, which direction would we go if next year we chose to reduce or increase, whatever? Would it be through the fees bylaw, or would it be, we have to review this bylaw?
This.
Thanks.
Go ahead, CA.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. On the agenda, a little farther down, is the update to the fees bylaw. That's why we have this report first, in case council wanted to do something with the $100 fee. We've proposed changes to the fees bylaw to include the $100 fee. But I've given this the amended motion, if that passes by council, that it's waived for this year. I guess we would amend the fees bylaw too, as it's presented, or we could just have it in the fees bylaw as presented, but we've got the authority under council's resolution for the refreshment vehicles that it's waived, and that's what we would apply for 2022.
Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
I think what Councillor Gorell is asking is that ultimately this fee, along with all the other fees, adult entertainment parlors and all the other things that we have, will ultimately appear on annually for review.
That's right.
So we are not locked in to anything, and council still has the power to adjust fees, not ad hoc, which is really the concern I have had with this one. It becomes a much more, it's organized so that every year we review the fees. This is included. We approve, disapprove, we can make changes. That our power is not taken away in that respect. We're just being a little better organized, I think is what I've heard. Am I correct, Your Worship?
Any further comments or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering if the first part of next year, this could come back to us so that before the fees are put out to us again in the new year, to see if we need to change this again to something maybe more palatable to the rest of the community.
I think that that's the review of the rates and bylaws at that time, or you could bring a notice of motion, should you wish. Okay, so I'm going to call the question. We have a long agenda ahead of us. So all those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and we're carried. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is planning report number SR-077-22, amendment to general rates and fees bylaw, addition of legal and advertising deposits for planning applications, special event related fees, and freedom of information requests. Moved by Councillor Gorell, seconded by Councillor Oki, that the committee of the whole recommends that council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-036, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 21-061, being a general purpose bylaw to establish general rates and fees and various services provided by the municipality. Discussion on this motion. I think the report that goes with this is fairly clear as to why some of the rates went down, some of them slightly, some of them went up. But these fees are charged on a cost recovery basis, and that is based on the time and effort required. For example, freedom of information request can take a lot of time, depending on what the request is, and processing of applications, permitting fees. Those are the stuff that we have to recover so that we can cover our costs. Any further comments or questions? Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Worship. And through you, a couple of things that I noticed was mining operations. And I guess my note is, why do we have any control over that, since it's a Ministry of Natural Resources entity? And every time we have a question about a mining situation within our community, we have to refer back to the MNR to give us or for them to deal with. And then secondly, there's a copy of office plan color, 50 cents, and a copy of zoning color is only 25 cents. Just wondering why there's 2 different cost variables for a color copy.
Go ahead, Madam Planner.
Through you, those fees aren't subject to any amendment right now, so we can certainly look at that when we bring forward the bylaw next year for any amendments, but those are just
What was that?
historic fees that have been in there.
Okay, further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And it's carried. Thank you. Next item is 5.4, planning report SR-070-22, planning and development department, building division, budget allocation for a lease of a new vehicle. Moved by Councillor Oki, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the committee of the whole recommends that council authorize the director of planning and development to proceed with the lease of vehicle based on the quotes obtained, and that the cost of the lease be funded from the building department operating budget. Any comments or questions in regards to this request? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried. Next item is the operations report SR-078-22, private road grant, capital stream and standard. That committee, and the motion comes forward from Councillor Maybe, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that committee in the whole recommends that council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-028, being a bylaw to enact the private road grant, capital stream and standard. Discussion on this motion. I just would like to say that I thank the director for having the pregnant pause that we did from the original iteration. This will help the private lane grant recipients to both improve the infrastructure that exists as well as maintaining standards, which we will get to. That it still remains the same as far as maintenance is concerned. So there's 2 streams. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Sorry, Your Worship, I fully support the changes and had the opportunity to talk to a few people on private roads. And I had suggested, and I hope it's taken into consideration, that the communications, and I understand that there's an idea around talking with the associations directly on this thing as the changes are implemented. I also still firmly believe that the residents on private roads on an individual basis should be made aware, because has been pointed out to me, and I know it from personal experience, private road associations can be challenging groups. And some people pay, some people refuse, some people don't understand that they moved onto a private road. It just turns out that way. So I'm hoping that we can have some individual communication go out as well. And I know that the director is thinking about those kinds of things. So I appreciate this change. This is very good. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you. Next is Operations Report SR-081-22 Lansdowne Service Area Infrastructure Assessment and Growth Readiness Study Update. Motion comes forward from Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council receive the Lansdowne Service Area Infrastructure Assessment and Growth Readiness Study Update prepared by J.L. Richards and Associate Limited. That the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council authorize staff to proceed with the request for proposal, RFP, to engage a firm to undertake a municipal class environmental assessment, MCEA, as required to address the recommendation regarding the standpipe and the water supply approvals identified in the update provided by J.L. Richards and Associates Limited. And that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council allocate a budget up to $75,000 from the Water Reserve Fund to fund the MCEA. Discussion on this motion. The director is already there to receive questions. Go ahead, Councillor Grow.
Because of the complexity, perhaps the director could give us some background on this. One immediate question that came to my mind was, when I read this, it says in there that a peer review was initiated. I don't recall, but my memory may be weak in terms of that coming before council as a cost. I do remember the SNC Lavalin came to us immediately after the onslaught of COVID, and being a complex report, my memory was we were satisfied with the report. Its findings were okay. It said we had the fire PSI all covered, and everyone sort of said, thank you very much. And suddenly I read, now we had a peer review somewhere in there. The very words are in there somewhere. And I don't want to have to drag that out, but I would. So there's a lot of unknowns to me here about why this even triggered, what triggered it, because I don't recall it coming before us. And if it did, I'd be happy to hear it. Thank you. That's a start point.
Go ahead.
Thank you,
Director.
through your worship. So the peer review that was completed was for the development south of the tracks. The potential 60 lot development that was coming down there. That's why a peer review was undertaken. And that's funded by the developers for that peer review. We have it in our development standards where we reserve the right to undertake a peer review, which we did. When we had engaged parties to do this peer review, it was noted that there were some inconsistencies, I guess, or some gaps that had been identified in the SNC Lavalin report. It didn't speak to capacity in the water tower, as an example. There were a few other things that I noted in the report that we had some concerns with, and that's why we had engaged J.L. Richards at that point to have a look.
The planner might be able to further elaborate on that.
Thank you. Through you, just to explain a little more about the peer review. So we had the application for draft plan of subdivision south of the tracks. A component of that application for draft plan of subdivision, which was never brought forward to council for review, that subdivision, because it was in the early stages of review, was a detailed servicing plan for the subdivision. That servicing plan, we wanted an engineer to review that servicing plan on behalf of the township. So we responded to the applicant saying the servicing plan needs to be reviewed. And based on that, that was the peer review. So what we did was I consulted 3 different engineering firms with the expertise in reviewing servicing and infrastructure plans, asked for quotes from each of these firms based on providing them with the SNC Lavalin report, as well as the servicing report that was prepared by the applicant's engineer. In reviewing those 2 reports, JL Richards identified some anomalies and questions with respect to the SNC report, which led to the further investigation. So the peer review was related to the development application and had nothing to do with the actual SNC Lavalin report. I just wanted to provide that clarification.
Follow up?
So I'm led to believe then, my understanding is, and thank you very much for that, that clarifies the words. So need. So we had a report that dealt, that did not deal with, what should I call that, by the way? What's the official title for what's going on south of the tracks?
Draft plan
Draft plan of subdivision. So the SNL Lavalin report did not deal with the draft plan of subdivision down south. So it was a legitimate report on that, and all its findings that said everything was okay up here with respect to everything I read. So what's triggered this, if my understanding, what's entirely triggered this is a draft plan of subdivision proposal in the south of town. So that leads to the next question. None of this report indicates to council the stage that that is at. None of the report has come to council about that draft plan of resolution as to its veracity, its financing, and all of these areas that would be of massive concern to myself, because everything I'm reading tonight is predicated upon something that I have no understanding about, and that is the draft plan of subdivision south of the railway tracks. All I've ever seen, and all I believe this council has ever seen, is a survey plan with the intention of roads and so on, and a lot of aspirational aspects of this, that, and the other. There was going to be a gymnasium, there was going to be this, going to be that. Now it's been reduced in this report that I'm reading tonight and supposed to make intelligent decisions about. Now we're talking 60 houses. Where did we suddenly come, or pardon me, did I miss something? There were more than 60 houses, I believe, mentioned in area number 1 in that original plan. And if there weren't, I stand corrected. But it seemed to be a bigger deal. Now we're looking at 60 homes. And that is driving this entire report, and that's what's driving everything. And that's what's driving, that singular fact is what's driving potentially millions of dollars of investment from this township without understanding a single darn thing about that plan of subdivision. So this would have to be deferred until another report comes explaining precisely what we know and what we don't know about that draft plan of subdivision. And I would like to know the financial commitments at times of rising interest rates, tight money, inflation that's through the roof. I would like to understand a little further about any development down there that we have any confidence, our confidence level of it ever happening, because you're asking us to spend millions when the first report said we were in good shape. So all of that is unsaid in this, and that disturbed me. It's all unsaid. There's not one word in here that talks about that. Thank you. That's
Go
my
ahead, Madam
opening
Planner.
chat.
Thank you. If I could just provide a little bit of background. I'm going to kind of go back to basics a little bit. The official plan identifies Lansdowne as a settlement area. There's no map in the room that I can show you on, but the settlement area of Lansdowne is identified in the official plan. We have policies within the official plan, right there, yeah, that say all development within the settlement area is required to be on full municipal services. So building from that, we did the SNC Lavalin report was commissioned, because one of the things in saying that, we had official plan policies that say everything within the service boundary area is required to be on full municipal water and sanitary. However, we didn't know what the capacity in the system was and the number of units that could be supported on full services based on the land commitment that's within the official plan. which was the reason that that study was done by the previous director of operations. With respect to the Lansdowne study, and I can tell you that the SNC Lavalin report was provided to any developer that has any inquiries with respect to vacant lands and is making an investment in the township, because any plan of subdivision requires a servicing report. We're the keepers of capacity and we allocate servicing capacity to development. So a draft plan of subdivision comes in for X number of lots. You are correct. The original subdivision was in excess of 200 lots.
Yes.
Through review of the application back and forth, we have a current official plan policy that says no more than 20 lots per phase in the subdivision. A subsequent application for official plan amendment was submitted that asked for 60 lots, which is where the number 60 is coming from. That being said, the applications have not been brought forward to council for a public meeting or a report at this point in time, because there's significant issues to be addressed with those applications of subdivision, and it wasn't appropriate to bring it forward for public meeting until the concepts were further refined. So that's why those reports regarding those subdivisions have not been brought forward. Irrespective of the application for draft plan of subdivision, the questions were brought up by J.L. Richards in terms of reviewing, not questions, observations were made by J.L. Richards in reviewing the SNC Lavalin report with respect to some of the recommendations, which based on their comments, and Dave, please jump in if I'm saying anything that isn't correct, that we thought needed to be looked at a little bit further, particularly given that we do have development pending. And we certainly can't issue a draft plan approval or make a recommendation regarding a draft plan approval without understanding if we have adequate capacity allocation within our servicing infrastructure.
So it's a chicken and egg.
That's correct, because we're the keepers of capacity. So if we get an application for development coming in saying, I want to build 300 units, we have to look at the existing capacity that's being used within Lansdowne. We have to look at the infill capacity within the existing settlement area. There's areas where there's double lots. There's areas where we've approved zoning amendments to increase density that is going to take up additional units. We know that there's some underdeveloped lots that could potentially be developed with additional things. So we have to make sure that we keep a reserve of capacity for the existing development. We have to make sure that when we approve a development that there's capacity allocation for that. Because if we approve a development that's required to be hooked up to water and sanitary, and we don't have capacity for water and sanitary, we've got a problem. So that's why this work is important in terms of, we have a policy framework in the official plan that says any new development within this boundary has to be serviced by municipal water and sanitary. We have to make sure that we're able to actually service any of that new development and that we have capacity to do so.
It
Follow
just, thank you through your worship. So many questions come from this, not the least of which, again, the first report said that, pardon me, we are talking now, if my memory is correct, at the bottom of the Richardson report here, 85 homes in total that are potentially serviced. And that's why we're being asked to build a brand new water tower, all this business. And yet, once again, I say what's driving this entire conversation is an unknown to us. And I'm going to get back to it. It's still an unknown. All I'm hearing is that we're to spend the money, we're to do something worth millions of dollars, exasperating a situation that's already tough in this community. And yet there's no promise. It's a chicken and egg. Build it and they will come. It's the baseball field of dreams. It's aspirational to me at this point. Now, you may have a different point of view on that, but it's not aspirational, Councillor Correll. It's solid. I haven't read anything, seen anything, talked to anybody, and this council has not either, I don't imagine, if I look around this table. So how can we possibly say, yep, no problem, let's get at it? $15 million later, probably, if I did my math quickly one morning, you know, when you take into account inflation and time down the road. So I'm really at a loss to understand how this is just plunked in front of us. And one other point I'd like to take up, I don't recall anywhere in our official plan that it says the land that we must have available for development has to be service land. It only has to be service land, I take it, and you said it, when it's triggered by a plan of subdivision. We have our 62 hectares of land or something. I believe that we've satisfied the provincial policy statements and so on, that we are required to have land. We have it. So to me, we're conflating a little bit the official plan and what's required and what actually is required. Am I wrong in saying that? Are we supposed to have service to every single lot we have out here behind Jesse Street, the former township office? We have land there. It's unserviced at this time. Do we service it? If my math was right, we still have north of the tracks easily serviced. We'd have at least 25 or 30 potential. And my final point, and I should put it to bed, in the last 4 years I've sat on this council, or 3 3/4 years, the percentage of homes built in settlement areas has been much lower than perhaps anticipated. I'll bet you 65% of the single dwelling homes built in this entire township are outside of settlement areas. They're rural in nature, and I appreciate that the official plan and its wonderfulness suggested all development has to be or should be encouraged to be within settlement areas. That simply hasn't been the case, in my humble opinion. And I could ask, and I see single dwelling, yes, there were so many applications and so on. They didn't happen here. They happened outside the settlement areas. So here we are looking at 85 potential sites in Lansdowne. I rest my case right there. I could go on and on. I have lots more questions, but that'll get the conversation going. Thanks.
Are there any other questions in regards to this? Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Some very good points being made here. I'm sort of circle back to the money, Your Worship. You're talking some millions of dollars to make these changes. And it has been my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that somehow the system itself has to support this. Not coming, we would, obviously council approves, but the liability over however many years has got to be borne by the system. And what we're doing is talking about a speculative investment, really, because there's no guarantee somebody's going to build 85 homes or 60 or 30 in a certain number of years. So how do we support this through the water system? Keeping in mind that it comes up quite regularly about the concern that the vast majority of us are going to start having to pay for a water system when we're all on wells and septics. I mean, that's been going on. It's about 95% of the county is on well and septic. So I'm just trying to figure out if you're going to finance something like this with this kind of money, how is that going to work with this little bitty infrastructure having to carry the load? Do we have to incorporate it separately? Do we have to do some sort of a fiddle that way in order to be able to sustain this?
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, it's not. I'm just, how do we pay for it? How do the users pay for this over a period of, I guess, would be ultimately decades of debt?
Well, and I don't want to speak for the planner or the director. We have an obligation to the existing users in the system to maintain it and make sure that it meets the regulations and what have you. The challenge with the first report that we received made it sound like there was plenty of capacity to service the existing lands that are already designated for development. The review of said report changed the narrative. And correct me if I'm wrong, directors, the reason this is coming forward is so that we can plan for the future, not necessarily pull the trigger and put a new water tower in next year. Would that be correct?
That is correct. We'd have to go through the MCEA process in order to determine what our requirements are and location of a tower before we go and build a tower.
So what's being asked of us tonight is to not commit to building a huge infrastructure project, but to source the information that is required to service the settlement area that is set out with the existing official plan. The other thing being is that the official plan has to be reviewed once every 10 years, correct?
Review, yeah.
Yeah. So we're in year 4 of an official plan reiteration because it was done right before we were sworn in as council. And the main concern that I have is the number of users that are currently on the system that are supporting it. And it is expensive and there's no other way to really slice that. The only way we can help lessen that burden is to have more users on the system, but there's that delicate balance to use up the existing capacity that remains that's there versus having to go and put up a brand new system, which is obviously nobody sitting around this table wants to see us go into debt for speculative nature developments. But nonetheless, we still have to be prepared to look forward to what might have to happen in the future in case someone came forward and needed to develop that south of the tracks because there's no more development lands, whether it be in Kingston, Brockville, where have you. So I'm just paraphrasing, but I'll have you go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Well, okay, that some clarity there to some extent. This MCEA, we're going to fund, we would be funding this out of the Water Reserve Fund, the $75,000. And so all the concerns that are being raised, I think are very, very valid. And I appreciate Councilor Gorell's effort. I think that part of what was in the official plan was a discussion about a community improvement program. Now, obviously, we've had to put things in the drawer for a long time. And can I assume that if we move ahead with this particular study, that it's incorporated to a larger effort to develop a community improvement program that the next council would have to, I suppose, authorize, but at the same time, to consider all of the needs of the various settlements in terms of improvement. That's where everyone needs to be involved in the conversation, in my view, about improving our communities. But this specifically, I know, is just dealing with the system down here. But I'm just wondering if at some point, the findings of this and the next stages of the discussion about whether we invest or not invest would be incorporated into a broader strategy about what our actual potential is, because the Stats Canada stuff doesn't suggest we've got all that much potential. So, I mean, that's probably old now, but.
So the question is, will this expansion of water sewer services be contemplated in the broader picture scope of the community improvement plan? Would that be?
Yes, I think, I mean, I'm stumbling a bit because, I'm learning as I'm going here. I read it and a lot of it is just complete gobbledygook to me, in terms of the report. Understandably, it's not what I do, but I'm just trying to figure out the investment of 75,000 out of the reserve fund. This doesn't, doesn't raise any concern with me. What raises concerns is it a component of a larger way of viewing where the township needs to think about its development? Obviously, with a raw water system, it may be more attractive to be in Lansdowne because you can have a service lot, or not, because we seem to have an awful lot of people building well outside of Lansdowne on lots and so on. So I'm just wanting to know if we're going to be able to get into the SIP process that my understanding would give us a broader understanding of what development would mean, that kind of development would mean. That's all I'm asking.
Director Holiday, would you like to speak to where this might fall into the overall development of the village as well in regards to infrastructure that might need to be replaced in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yep. Thank you. The water systems that we had included money in the budget for 2022 for the redevelopment of the village of Lansdowne, including storm sewers. Drainage is an issue in the village, and it's something that needs to be addressed. But we weren't going to move forward with that project until we had addressed this issue. Given that it was raised, it didn't seem feasible to move forward with one project without first addressing the other. So I think the two of them together, we know now that the distribution network is sufficient. So there is no impact to the actual roads for rebuilding roads and putting in storm sewers. But at the same time, we have this other massive project that we have to consider at the same time, where potentially relocating a water tower to get more elevation is going to have impact on an underground infrastructure from that point of view. So I think that the two will have to be in tandem, the two projects together, and we can't push one ahead of the other at this point, because we don't know exactly where we're going to locate the water towers, as an example. We know where the lagoons are, we know where our pumping station is, but the big one at this point is the water tower. So that's what I know about that. I want to add something as well, and I think maybe it is a bit too much gobbledygook, but the fire underwriter service, the calculation of the ABC, and where we are currently deficient, we have sufficient water, potable water in our village. Where we have this issue is, and I said it in here, but it might be too much, is if the system is offline. And what that means is that we have backup generators and we have all those kinds of things, but say the wells got struck by lightning. We all know how much of a chance there is of that. But say, or a tornado went through, similar to what just happened up in Ottawa. If that happened and both pumps were taken offline, and at the same time we had this miraculous fire where we have to fight it for 2 hours, we do not have enough water in our water towers or in our standpipe to accommodate a 2-hour firefight of that fire. So there are things that we can do in the interim to address that. And currently our fire department already does that. They don't just draw from the hydrants. They'll go and draw from alternate sources and fill the baths at the same time. So we can introduce standard operating procedures that state, in order to fight a 2-hour fire when the system is offline, that we would draw from an alternate source similar to Ivy Lee or Rockport, any of those protocols. So that I wanted to explain that when you see the graph and it shows that our capacity is much lower than what it needs to be, that is the situation. That's where both pumps are offline. We have a massive fire and it's all hands on deck.
So what I might propose, and I can't do this from the top of the table, it would have to come from council, but based on the concerns that we're hearing around the table, can we table this motion until next week so that council can have further opportunity to discuss with the directors or ask for further information? Or is that what the will of council is? I'm not trying to put anything in anybody's mouth, but I don't want anybody to feel like this is trying to be ran through, because that's not the intent. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
The discussion is about a $75,000 study. It
Correct.
is not about building
Correct.
a new tower. I mean, and if we need to do the $75,000 study to find out if we really do need, presumably we'll find out exactly what we need. Will we not?
Yes.
So I'm not sure that it's about delay. It's about ultimately having more information before we really act. I think that's the basis upon what I think I'm hearing from Councillor Gorell. It's just that suddenly we're talking about $15 million expenditures and nobody really knows what's going on. So the idea of the study, my understanding, is that'll help us
Make the decision.
make better decisions. And in the meantime, we must be assuring residents that the water is safe. I mean, above all, it's a different subject, but let's face it, when we see things go sideways, somebody starts worrying about the water. The water is good. The water is fine. The water is drinkable. These are all things that are not going to change regardless of what we do. But in the short term, I would support the study if it brought me better enlightenment about what really needs to be done. And I'm assuming that's the idea.
Okay, so I'll recognize Councillor Gorell and then go ahead.
One, what would be the shelf life on a dusty old study on this, what we're being asked to spend the money on? What would be its shelf life? In other words, if this whole deal got delayed 5 years, does that study go in the trash bin? Does it have a year and a half? That would be, I think, my first concern. It's not the money, it's shelf life, because I still circle back to reading 85 dwellings in this community seems a little aspirational to me. Therefore, if we're going to be spending money, it's a cut to me, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. It starts with this and then it goes to that and then it goes to that. And all of these studies end up on a shelf somewhere. We're going to end up in some not a good place. So I would feel better, and this council would probably feel better, if we could speak to, I even hate to use the word, the veracity of the underlying assumptions here. You know, you can just say, Brock, they're legitimate. We talk to people. Show me that. Who are we talking to about 85 dwellings? Give me a concept of the timeline, because I don't want that dusty report sitting up there expiring. Give me an idea of where these people are coming from. I have never read in the 4 years sitting here, 3.5, of any development in this entire township going through to the 20-year plan on the official plan that took us to 2038 that said we were going to be more than 10,500 people in this entire community. And as I said earlier, if better than 60% of the homes, single dwelling homes, are being built outside of settlement areas, I'm still looking at this and I question its veracity, and I would stand corrected if someone said it's inevitable that you're going to have 85 homes. How many homes were built here in the last 5 years? How many?
So
Just, those are all rhetorical,
Yep.
but they're important to inform us that why do we need 85 dwellings committed? Thank you.
go ahead, Director.
Not to speak out of turn, Marnie, and through your worship, we have been approached by developers on 2 separate properties within the village interested in building. The one directly south of us, the land that's for sale, there's been, I don't know how many potentially interested parties in that development. And then obviously this one south of the tracks, where at one point it was above 200 homes. So there is an interest in this location, that whether it's one group or another, that they see that there's developable land, and the mayor, yourself, you said it, that we're not gaining developable land. The city of Kingston is starting to close itself in and going up, as are other municipalities. We're here, and I think we should be setting ourselves up to be available for that development.
So can you speak to the question that Councillor Gorell had in regards to shelf life,
Yes.
as far as whether this report can be
Yeah, so-
validated?
Thank you. Through your worship, we spoke with the consultant about this, and they said typically the environmental assessment is valid for 10 years, which is why we're only looking at the water at this point, because we're saying that it's going to take 50 odd lots before we get to that point with the sanitary. So it doesn't make sense to look that far out yet, because we're not ready for it. We haven't hit those triggers, and that's why they provided that 80% line. That's typically when you start having that conversation about upgrades. We're not there. We are with the water. We're not with the sanitary. So we want to proceed with the water at this point, and then review the sanitary once we hit that trigger.
Follow up, and then I've got Councillor Fody.
Please, I'll.
Okay,
I'll-
Councillor Fody,
okay.
go ahead.
Thank you, your worship. It's disappointing, would be my first thought when I saw this report. It was my hope and belief for the villagers of Lansdowne, we could offset their skyrocketing costs of water and sewer by adding enough homes to help dwindle the cost down, if you will. And that is the crux of the whole village of Lansdowne. We are not the size of Prescott or Gananoque. Thus, the villagers get handed these hefty bills. The part I really have trouble getting my head wrapped around is the incapacity of the size of our water tower. I used to have standpipes on the farm. We called them silos. And we put thousands of tons through those standpipes into a dairy herd 365 days a year. I don't know the particular dimensions of that water tower, but comparing it, I would say it's 30, 35 feet in diameter. It's about 120 feet high. I doubt there's a water tap in Lansdowne that's any higher than 30 feet off the base of that tower, second floor of anybody's home. So therefore, we've got 90 feet of water pressure above the highest tap in the village. These are the kind of things I can't get my head around. What is wrong with this water standpipe? Was it totally done wrong? Because based on some of this capacity and maximum flows, and I understand my limited capacity of being an engineer, which is 0. But when you look at these numbers that are presented to us, and this is where I concentrated my time, I don't see how this water standpipe that we currently have can't be somehow rectified to be more useful. Because if you're using just these numbers and don't look at that standpipe, so we're looking to build a water tower that's in the circumference of 3 village blocks and the height of the Skydeck Tower on Hill Island. Is that what we need to provide water to a village of 500 people? I don't know. I'm lost because something really seems amiss here on the ability of our current water tower.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. The challenge with the standpipe, in order to achieve the pressure, that's where the ABC calculation comes in, where the bottom portion of it is basically a wash. You have to have that head pressure in order to achieve that flow. And what we're being told from the engineers is that we don't have enough head pressure to be able to fight fire. Even currently out at the school as an example, we're even just to hook onto the tap, we're not hitting the fire pressures that they're looking for. With that node just it's not achieving that right from the get-go. And then the capacity of the water tower. So when the tower was built in the 70s, they didn't have the fire underwriter service standards that we have to adhere to now. This has been created, and I had the date, and I apologize that I failed to put it into the report. So the standard has been updated. I don't know how they came up with the numbers that they did. I'm not in the fire service, but that this is what we have to build it to. This is the new standard through the Ministry of the Environment, through the fire underwriter service that we're trying to adhere to. And currently we're not adhering to that for firefighting services.
So I don't want to cut this off short because I still think there's more discussion to be had, but we have been on this topic for quite some time. And we do still have some items on the agenda that we have to get through. So what would council like to do? Would you like to table this to the committee of the whole in July? Would you like to table this to the council meeting next week? I'm just wanting to give people more opportunity to have further conversation, to gain further clarity, if that is what's desired, or you can leave it on the motion on the floor and defeat it, should you wish. That is the will of council. So I'm just trying to give some options here. Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you. I would like to continue on with the assessment, environmental assessment, because right now we couldn't do a thing about anything else until that's accomplished, correct? That would be our next move. That's why it's presented to us this way. Councillor Grell, I absolutely love that question. Is the shelf life? I mean, that is critical, but to your answer, it's approximately 10 years. I don't want to see us hold this village back. We've spent a lot bigger dollars than this and will in the future, and other councils will as well. But if we're going to move this village forward and soften the blow of our water and sewer rates in this village, we have to move on with this before we can do anything else. I suggest we carry on and we don't postpone this at all.
Okay, go ahead.
Just to add about the financial blow, this is the ideal type of project for a federal and provincial grant. Clean water is across the board is always the number one thing. It's right at the top of our asset management for risk. And it's just something that we have to do. And this is when we put out an RFP for consultant and construction, we would definitely be including that we're applying for all grants available for something like this. I think that's really important.
Follow up.
Thank you, your worship, through you. Well, that bodes one quick question. If we have this ready or have this study done, I guess I should ask what timeline will we be looking at approximately? But more importantly, to follow through on your grants comment, if we have this done, we're immediately ready to throw into grants at that point? Or at least a larger stepping stone has been had?
So the environmental assessment would get us through the preliminary phases to be ready to design. The next stage would be the detailed design to get it ready for shovel. They typically want shovel-ready projects, but at the same time, we're designing a municipal tower. So I think that they would appreciate that we've done the preliminary work and include the design of the actual.
Okay, and then to backtrack, what time frame would you be looking at for this to be?
Yeah, so the time frame for this, the consultant has said it takes about 8 months to get through the environmental assessment phase. And then we would have our design after that. They said we could have a standpipe constructed within 2 years.
Okay, so I'm going to call the question then. And because based on the feedback that we're getting is that there's Councillor Grell, do you have a brief comment?
It's hard to be brief when there are so many outstanding issues here. And none of us should be prepared to vote on this yet, because it's still, I get back to, show me the money, show me that it's not aspirational, show me a number of things. And these numbers, I'm not referring to the numbers of peak daily demand and all, but the numbers of how many homes. Why not 200 homes? I know why. It's because that wouldn't have suited. We would have needed a bigger water tower. So instead, what they did is we jigged it so that you just need just the right number of homes to trigger this thing. I could reverse engineer that in my thinking, probably in error. But I mean, I read this and I just go, this is too premature for us to be voting, even though it's only on an environmental assessment that has a shelf life. Does anyone feel confident looking around this table? Is that what we're voting on? The confidence of this? Or is it just, oh, we're voting a sum of money for an environmental assessment?
So if you would like to have this tabled, you should put forward a motion to table this until a specific date. That's all that is required. That's why I've. put it out a
January
couple times.
23? Just kidding. How about, go ahead, Councilor Jameson. Thank you.
Go
Your
ahead.
worship, it's going to take 2 years to do the environmental assessment. Is that what I'm hearing?
8 months.
8 months, but then we're another 2 years before we're starting to, or another 2 years before we'd be in a position to put up a tower?
If we were full steam ahead, everything could be completed within 2 years.
Completed within 2 years. So the environmental assessment takes us into next year. So we're 25, 26.
Yeah.
Realistically.
Yeah.
So at the risk of being accused of kicking the can down the road, I'm in favor of the environmental assessment because it's going to have to be done no matter what. It just simply will be required at some point in order to try to expand. I'm not knocking the concept of development in Lansdowne at all. I just want to make sure that the people that own the water system can pay for it. That's what I really am concerned about.
I'm sorry,
So,
may I ask one final question?
sure.
And it will be my last question. What do the developers require? Is this the final, does this make them happy? Does this make the developers go, we're good? I mean, if the study came back, at what point do they kick in and commit to our commitments as a township? In other words, we do the environmental, then we do the design, then we build, we'll be the smallest community with 2 water towers in Ontario, I imagine. At what point do the developers say, thanks, you've jumped through all the hoops? At what point do we really get serious with them? And I get back to referring to a lot of what was said about 200 and some homes was before the rising interest rates and before inflation went through the roof and any bank. So are they really sitting there prepared to be talking? At what point does that become reality? Thank you. And that's my
Go
last
ahead,
statement.
Madam Planner.
Thank you. So obviously, a plan of subdivision has market forces that are also dictating the absorption rate. And you're not incorrect in saying that there's been a slow growth within Lansdowne within the last 5 years. You're correct in that, saying that. However, to attract new development, you have to have a certain threshold to be able to commit to developing, because the economies aren't there to do a detailed engineering, design and servicing for a subdivision of 10 to 15 lots, given the expenditures that go out there. So I think you said it earlier, and that it's a chicken and egg thing. You have to have the servicing for people to come and build into it. Now, there's other things that the township might want to look at and consider in terms of development charges, growth related, to help offset growth related costs, and different studies that could be done in the interim while we're starting to get all of our pieces lined up. I can't speak from a developer's perspective in terms of what makes it attractive for development. Are we really going to build 80 to 150 lots in Lansdowne? Lansdowne within the growth area that's identified in the official plan has the capacity to host that many lots, but doesn't currently have the capacity to service that many lots. So yes, there would have to be a potential change in market forces. There'd have to be a commitment on the part of developers to come in and build at that scale. Notwithstanding all of that, we have a policy framework for Lansdowne that says this is where we should get the more dense growth, because you're absolutely correct. There's been a number of single family homes built outside of Lansdowne, and that's where we've seen most of the growth. But Lansdowne has the infrastructure that could support low-rise apartment buildings, townhouses, the more dense forms of development that are going to allow people to age in place in our community and stay in the community as a whole. So it's a balancing act. I can't crystal ball what the future is going to be for development and absorption rates of development in Lansdowne. But if we don't have the servicing infrastructure and plans in place, we could be missing out on development that's going to help offset the number of users on the system.
So I'll let you have the last word, and then I need this council to make a decision whether I'm calling the question or whether we're tabling this. Please and thank you. Go ahead.
Through your worship. There is one more point of clarification, is that we cannot run 2 water towers in tandem. We
Can't
cannot
run
run
2.
2 water towers in tandem.
So we couldn't put up another smaller standpipe to add capacity. It has to be one and only.
It has to be one big one, yes.
Okay, so with that, what would you like to do, council? I'm taking direction from you. If you want to kick the can down the road, that is within your purview. The staff were obligated to bring this to our attention due to the peer review, and they have done so. So, Mr. Maybe, what would you like to do?
Your worship, I think we should go ahead. We can't do anything without the report. As much as Councillor Corral's arguments, I agree with some of them. But without the report, we can't move forward and know whether we have capacity. Well, we know we don't have some capacity already, but let's see what this next report brings to the table to clarify your questions. And I think that's the best way of putting it.
Okay, so Terry Fody, did you?
I had indicated, and I agree with Councillor Maybe, all we're committing to financially right now is the study. Any chance it would come in less than that, or is this kind of a high ball to cover it all?
The engineers had just completed the same task in Norwood, and that's what the numbers had worked out to.
Okay.
They were in a similar situation, actually.
I've been to Norwood. By the way, their tower is high.
It is
So I'm
now.
assuming their water flow is good. No, I think we can't hold back development. We all know where that leads. It leads to a prosperous community, and it spins off in tax dollars and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into that speech. I'm just going to support Councilor Maybe. I want to vote. This is the only money we're committing to right now. We might not spend 5 more cents toward anything to do with water sewer capacity in the village once this comes back. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed, none. Motion carries. Okay, I'm going to give everybody a very quick break because we've been going full tilt now since 6. We still have about 40 minutes left. So actually 35 once everybody uses the refreshment room. So back at 8:55, please. Thank you. meeting. Reconvening the meeting at 8:55. And we're moving forward with planning report SR-08222 zoning bylaw amendment application number D14 2022-005 920 Maple Ridge Lane. And the motion comes forward from Counselor Maybe, seconded by Counselor Fode. The committee of the whole recommends that council approve the zoning bylaw amendment attached to this resort as Exhibit F to rezone the property from shoreline residential RS to shoreline residential special exception 56 to convert an existing single detached dwelling into an accessory building containing a sleeping cabin in the lower level of the structure. Comments, questions, queries? Go ahead, Counselor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. With the new structure, and if the Director of Planning can clarify, it is set back the required distance, to the actual structure, but is the front deck that protrudes from the front of it within that zone? Thank you.
Madam Planner? Sorry, for clarification, are you talking about the deck on the existing structure?
The actual new structure, because it's in the same report. That's why I bring it up.
The new structure entirely complies with the zoning bylaw, so the relief is only required for the existing structure. The proposed house and deck are set back outside of the 30 meters.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Carried. Next motion, moved by Counselor Fode, seconded by Counselor Maybe, that the committee of the whole recommends that council adopt the official plan amendment attached to the report as Exhibit D to amend the designation of property from tourist commercial to residential, and that the amendment be forwarded to the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville for approval. And that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve the zoning bylaw amendment attached to this report as Exhibit E to rezone the property from tourist commercial to shoreline residential RS. Any comments, queries, questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you. Okay, in regards to administration report SR-068-22 potential restricted acts lame duck council period recommendation. The motion comes forward from Counselor Fode and seconded by Counselor Maybe, that the committee of the whole recommends that council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 22-037, being a bylaw to delegate certain authorities during a restricted authority lame duck council period. So there is a report in front of you, council members, in regards to this that hopefully clarifies the specifics. If not, I hope that you've had an opportunity to speak to the clerk and the CAO. Is there any comments or questions in regards to this? Okay, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I've been through this before. We're handing over, I mean, if it's not in the budget, we're eligible to spend money, the CAO. Is there a chance of having 2 people rather than just 1?
I don't know what that entails. Madam Clerk, can you speak to that request?
Thank you, Worship, through you. For clarification, in the bylaw presented within the report, it does say that in the event that the chief administrative officer isn't able to take on the delegated authorities, so in absence of that position, myself as clerk would be in that position.
But your request
I'm
is to
not-
have 2 at the same time?
At all times.
Is that something that is usual within municipalities? Anybody have any experience with that in the senior management position?
Well, just for clarification through you, Your Worship, we've seen what can happen when we leave the power into one person's hands. You end up with different kinds of pumps. You end up with
I'll just stop you
fuel
there.
pads and office buildings, and so
Okay.
I just want to have the safety of, as we use the term, sober second thought.
Fair enough. Maybe we should table this till next week to have further information gathered on this. Go ahead, Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship. In the world I worked in, there was a separation between purchasing authority and spending authority. There was a sign, countersign
Mhm.
thing, and it saved a lot of trouble.
Yeah. And that's why we have dual signatures on checks and what have you, but we're talking about authority to spend from budget and non-budget, I believe. So do you want to entertain a motion to table this till the council meeting for further discussion based on information or questions that were asked tonight in regards to a sign, countersign? Councillor Foti?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I agree with the deputy mayor. I have lived through an organization that was abused, and I'm not talking about anything political. I have lived through an organization that was absolutely almost financially ruined. And unless our current CAO is willing to stay on for the next 150 years to satisfy this township, then I see no reason that we can't support dual signing as indicated by the deputy mayor.
So I'm asking for this to be tabled so that the senior administration staff can look into the wording for that.
I will so move.
Okay, so tabled until council. Via Terry Foti, seconded by Councillor Olkey. Okay. Any comments? We're gonna vote. Sorry, it's not an amendment. Getting tired, obviously. It's not an amendment, so we're not voting on the amendment. So we'll vote on this being tabled. All those in favor of tabling the motion till the next council meeting? All those opposed? And it's okay. So under unfinished business, is there any unfinished business? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
We spoke previously about police oversight. With them, and I believe at the time, we said, no, we're going to put the brakes on that because there was something coming from higher above.
There's a regional police board that's coming into effect as per the province. I don't, but off the top of my head, but I can ask. That information can be requested because it was regionally done and there would be so many representatives from Leeds, so many from Grenville based on the different detachments, or sorry, so many representatives from municipalities within the Leeds detachment, within the Grenville detachment, but I can ask that question.
Just as an example. You know, there's now that things have opened up, you need coaches, you need, you know, we've got some recreation now and people are trying to get police checks. It's hard to do when nobody's in the office and it's closed for no particular reason. It's not a holiday, it's not whatever. They just seem to open and close when they want. That's just one example. There's lots of others.
And so we'll get an answer for that. And anything else on your list? You're good? Okay. Any other unfinished business? Okay, other business. Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I've likely received as many negative comments on one subject in this past couple of weeks as I've received in 3.5 years I've sat here. And that is our choice to not mow in the month of May. As a farmer, I can tell you how much horsepower it costs to wait the month of May and cut in the month of June. And it is now evident all around this building. I know the theory was right. The pollinators were likely thrilled. But if you took the square footage of township property that wasn't mowed that should have been and compared it to what we have in this township, it wouldn't even show up on the map. There's many residents are less than pleased, and that's about the most polite language I can use tonight. I come by here last week, don't know what day the staff chose to mow this, and there was 3 or 4 of our staff out here at 7:30 in the morning with forks, hand bombing cut grass by the wad into some form of transportation to get it off the front lawn. It was an experiment. It was meant to be well. It was an absolute obstetric disaster. Thank you.
Okay, other business? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Am I correct in the fact that the pool down in Landon's Bay, this is our last year?
We no longer have that access to that pool. It expired during COVID, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Is there a thought of an outdoor pool?
There
our own?
was a community service group that did come forward about 6 months ago that was looking at possibly taking on a project to build a public pool that would be potentially located in the township. That has not gone anywhere at this point. Right now, due to the costs of our infrastructure projects that we have, I'm not sure that we are in a position to put that money forward. Not to say that we couldn't put plans in place for future. So if it's something that you'd like to see, I would encourage you to speak to the Director of Operations
Okay.
to do that. Councillor Graff?
I remember, excuse me, in to Councillor Lackey, we did 3 years ago or so, we did have actually a presentation. And I think it was to do with our strategic planning at that time, if my memory's right. And it did come up, this concept of, because we were fighting or we were having a challenging time with the pool. And I do remember it came up and the people that addressed us were very knowledgeable about municipal pools. And they made it very clear that it's a very large financial investment and advised against it because of the costs, the ongoing operational costs and so on. I forget the name of the company. It would be easy to find. It would have been 3 years ago, I think, when we were doing our strategic planning, and perhaps management team, Kim Goodman, would maybe recall that discussion. It was a good one. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll encourage you to speak to staff if you want to move that forward at all. Any other business? There's 2 notices of motion coming forward from Councillor Jameson addressing post-pandemic youth. Whereas health agency reports point to increased health and wellness challenges for our young people coming out of the pandemic, and whereas council has approved financial support established and respected youth programs to link Gananoque, Lansdowne, and Brockville. Whereas the catchment school for the greater number of both the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands Ward 2 students in the Township of Rideau Lakes is the Rideau Lakes District High School located in Elgin. And whereas both the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands and the Township of Rideau Lakes undertake a variety of recreation and library programs with a youth focus, and both have representatives in the North Leeds Youth Coordinating Committee working out of Rideau Lakes District High School. Now, therefore, be it resolved, council directs staff to liaise with counterparts in the Township of Rideau Lakes with the view to identifying partnerships and student-focused programming that maximize to serve youth program needs in the Rideau Lakes District's high school catchment area, and bring recommendations to council in the near future. And that's also referencing the Brookville Municipal Drug Strategy Report, a framework for action, April 2022. Second notice of motion is from Councillor Olkey, potential investments for reserve funds. Whereas the prudent management of the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands funds has resulted in the significant increase of the financial reserves. And whereas portions of these reserve funds will not be required for immediate use. And whereas it is prudent to acquire some interest on these funds via the investment instruments allowed for lower tier government reserve holdings. Now, therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to investigate potential investments for holding the township's reserve funds. So that will be, those 2 motions will be coming forward to council. As far as a mayor's update, I'll be honest, I was preparing diligently for my week, which is crazy, ahead with county, joint services, Mapleview Lodge, and committee of the whole. There is lots going on. I too have received a number of instances of dismay in regards to No Mow May. I guess this is as good a time as any just to reiterate a couple of things. You know, everything that we try to do here is for the best interest of the community, the environment, and our community as a whole. Doesn't mean that everything is perfect. Doesn't mean that we hit the target every single time, but we tried. And we've heard the feedback loud and clear. And the director of operations has taken a lot of the brunt of that as well. He is well aware, and is looking to approaching it from a different fashion next year, if at all. So that will be up to us to look at it. The other thing that we probably could have done somewhat better is the communication piece that went along with that, in that we did put it out there on social media, but maybe not as far enough in advance to really delve into people's psyche to make sure that they remembered why we were doing it, other than just driving by and going, why haven't they cut the lawn? Without pollination, we don't eat as a planet. So it's kind of a thing. But we understand that there's also concern about ticks in, especially the prevalence here in our township. So there is a balance to be achieved there. So we do thank the staff who have worked hard to clean up the windrows, as you will. There was no rake that on the back of a tractor that I'm used to, but nonetheless, they've done a good job of trying to get that cleaned up, and we thank them for that. Also, there was the agribusiness summit and business summit yesterday at Furnace Falls Farm, which I was unable to attend, but 2 councillors did attend. That was well attended and well represented. And the last time they had a similar event, only a couple months ago, it was also well attended. So it's great to see that people are getting out and about. The other thing, street sweeping. And I bring this up because it's a topic that's come up recently. So the township had a contract with a company that was bought out for street sweeping. And the company that bought out said street sweeping company was not going to honor the remaining year on the contract. So our director had to find alternative source for street sweeping, which we did. And so it put us a little bit behind the 8 ball. I've recently received a request in regards to Prince Street in Lansdowne and when the street sweeping would happen. So the street sweeping will be happening on Prince Street. However, that is a county road. So I have to find out from county. But needless to say, the director and I have had conversations about possible inefficiencies, and that we have street sweepers coming in from county for 2 small sections within our township boundary areas. And due to the initiative of our director, other directors of public works will be meeting on Wednesday here in our township, looking to find ways to create those efficiencies. So I just want to underscore the fact that while many township residents might think that it's our goal to spend as much money as possible, I can assure you that township staff is always looking at ways to find those efficiencies and help make things run smoother. So Councillor Jamieson?
Is Main Street in Sealy's Bay
County?
swept by the county?
It would
Yeah,
be. Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Same with Lyndhurst. So the only street sweeping we would do is in Rockport and in Ivy Lee. And even in the residents in Rockport were wondering where the street sweeper was and had reached out. But yeah, so unfortunately, we don't have control over private business. We would hope that our contracts are solid. Having said that, the same thing happened at the county level when it came to crack sealing. The contract that was had at the county level, the crack sealing company just said, yeah, we don't have time. So, as much as we dot the I's and cross the T's, it doesn't always turn out perfectly. I just want to say congratulations to the group out in Sealy's Bay for their excellent small halls concert at the Sealy's Bay Fire Hall. I had the benefit of being there, and I thank Councillor Jameson for the invite. Some great music, and great to be around live music with a crowd of people. There were still lots of people wearing masks, which was perfectly fine. And, but it was great to be in that venue. So I look forward to a number of events that are happening going forward. Speaking of which, Canada Day celebrations are continuing, and the Canada Day parade will be happening in Sealy's Bay, as far as we're aware at this point. We also have Ribfest that's happening in Gananoque, I believe around the same time. The Polka Run is happening. There was something else that I just saw. Oh, Rockport Jam, Schoolhouse Jam. That's happening. And all of these events, I know that Katie Forrester has put, I think, a list of the events on our website or has been tweeting them and Facebooking them out, what have you. So if you are interested in spending some time and energy and money in our local community, please look up those events. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about that. Councillor Fode, then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to think we need to send out a little shout out to our area youth, the athletic group in particular, who have moved on from local schools, regional meets to bring home gold right to our region. And Mrs. Kaylee Clark from Gananoque brought home a gold medal in javelin, and that's, I'm sure, not an easy accomplishment. So it's nice that our youth is doing a great job of representing us outside our township and bringing those accolades home to the township of Leeds and Thousand Islands and Gananoque and Rideau. All these schools intertwine, but it's nice to know that our youth are still excelling after 2 years of being locked down is my real point.
The other point to that is that we have financially supported Kaylee and her national dream, which I believe is the next goal for her. So it is great to see local kids achieving. I know there's a number of individuals that came from our area that went to OFSA from different schools. We have kids that are at TIS, we have kids that are at St. Mary's, at Regi, at whatever, but they're from here and they do represent us well. So go ahead, Councillor James.
Just a question of procedure. Do we leave these notice of motions until next week?
Correct.
Okay,
We have to give notice of the motion.
thank you and good night.
I know it's getting late. Is there any other announcements? Go ahead, Councillor, maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship. The past weekend was the Queen's Jubilee, 70 years of reign. Are you going to be around that long? Just thought I'd throw it out there as an option. But to that point, I had the great opportunity to end up on CBC television on Thursday morning to represent our area with the cry. 8 of us within the Canada participated in the cry. So if you want to see it, I do have it on my phone, but you can also look on CBC. Played about 9:20 of that particular morning. So it was a great honor to have that task. And very good that the Queen has been around that long. Thank you.
Here. Oh, yay. It has been nice to watch the Queen's Jubilee and makes you very proud to be part of the Commonwealth and to have that position and to see what that woman has seen over the years is definitely an accomplishment and survive it. Yeah. Okay, so well, on that note, motion comes forward from Councillor Maybe and seconded by Councillor Fode, the committee of the whole adjourned. All those in favor? All those opposed? Carried. Thank you, everyone.